Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and God will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little while longer. I give you a new commandment. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you should also love one another. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. So many years ago, in the 1980s, I did my graduate theological work at the Catholic University of America, which at the time was considered one of the best three theological schools in the country. And I loved that education, loved it. Now, Catholic University also offered a master's and a doctorate degree in liturgical studies, and at that time it was considered one of the three best schools in the world to receive a degree in liturgical studies. San Anselmo's in Rome was the other one, and L'Institut Catholique in Paris was the third. So I decided, besides my divinity work for ordination to the priesthood, that I would, in addition, do a master's degree in liturgical studies, because I was always interested in liturgy. Ever since I was a little boy, I'm a musician. I was always up in the choir, either singing or playing the organ or something like that. And from when I was a little, and I was a server, altar boy as well, I was always fascinated with the liturgy. So I thought I'd go ahead and get a degree in liturgy as well. So we had a joke in the liturgical studies program at Catholic University that went like this: "What's the difference between a liturgist and a terrorist? You can negotiate with the terrorist." Meaning, so many liturgists or so-called liturgists get so tied up in the rules and the rubrics and the right way of doing things, and they get in huge arguments over this stuff. Huge arguments. I see this on my Facebook page. I'm like in a couple of liturgical groups, and I'm like, really, isn't there something more important in life than to argue about stuff? People actually get in huge discussions and arguments about what's appropriate or not. Some guy was going off because his pastor, on Gaudete Sunday during Lent, wore a purple vestment, and you're supposed to wear pink. Really? Where's the love? Where's the love? When I was at St. Edward's as music director, and these two were in my youth choir back then, and then later on my adult choir, there was a group of people, and I imagine that they're still around in the Archdiocese. We used to call them the liturgical police. And this is a small group of people that used to show up at different parishes and take notes to make sure that Father was saying Mass correctly and that all the rubrics were being done correctly. Well, they came to St. Edward's one Sunday. I don't know if you all ever heard this story, but they stole some of our Eucharistic bread. We had people in the parish that would bake the bread, instead of having the wafers. And they stole some of it, and they took it to a chemist at the University of Louisville and had it analyzed. And they discovered in that analysis that we were using a little bit of honey and baking soda so the bread would raise a little bit, instead of just flour and water, which the rubrics say it can only be flour and water. Can you imagine a group of people so concerned about bread? Now, believe it or not, St. Edward's went all the way to the Vatican because of the bread that we used. We were reported to the Vatican, And Cardinal Arinze, who was head of the Congregation for Liturgy in the Vatican, wrote a letter to the Archbishop and to Father Joe, who was our pastor at the time. And Joe showed me the letter, and he goes, "Can you believe this?" And it's signed Vatican, Cardinal Arinze, "Dear Father, please stop this grave moral abuse of using honey and baking soda in your Eucharistic bread." Can you believe that? I mean, it's just nuts, all the way to the Vatican. Archbishop Kelly was the archbishop at the time, and basically his letter to Father Joe was just like, whatever. He didn't care. But I read that letter and I'm thinking, aren't there other things to worry about? Aren't there better things to worry about? Where's the love? And who cares if there's honey or a little baking soda in our Eucharistic bread? Somebody recently here told me that she was at a parish, and we offer gluten-free bread here for those who have celiac disease, which I think is a great thing. She was at a parish that refused to serve gluten-free bread because the rubrics say it's supposed to be flour and water. And so she has recently started coming here, and for the first time in 17 years, she's received communion. Where is the love? Where's the love? I remember years ago, again, when I was at St. Edward's as music director and worship director, I went to a diocesan conference on hospitality. And there were lay ministers and priests, and the bishop was there from all over the diocese, talking about the importance of hospitality in our liturgy and in our parishes. And the presenter went on and on all day about the importance of hospitality, signage, language, English, Spanish, the importance of greeters at the door to greet people, the importance of people in the parish to recognize new members that came in and making a point to greet them and to welcome them. All good and well. But towards the end of the conference, I stood up and I asked this question. I said, all this stuff about hospitality is all good and well, and I agree with it. However, I think we're missing a central point here. We can be hospitable all we want with signage and greeters and welcoming and all this other stuff, but our Eucharist is inherently inhospitable when we put up barriers to who is welcome at this table and who is not. There was dead silence in the room. Archbishop Kurtz certainly did not appreciate that question, and the presenter didn't appreciate it, and I was summarily ignored. And she just kind of went on. But I thought, we can talk about hospitality all we want, but if we put up barriers to the table, what does that say to people? What does that say to people? Where's the love? Where's the love? Jesus in the gospel today talks about love, and Jesus so often in the gospels over and over again talks about love. And I think Jesus talks so much about love because he saw this stuff coming. He saw it in his own Jewish tradition over the centuries, how 12 commandments got augmented and turned into over 600 commandments. Did you know that? There were not only the 12 commandments that we're familiar with, but there's over 600 commandments over the centuries, mainly about ritual purity and the right way of doing things. To the exclusion of love, people began to worship the rules instead of the way. Jesus saw this and over and over and over again speaks about the primacy of love. This is how they will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. He didn't say anything about baking soda and honey. But we turned following the way of Jesus into worshiping Jesus as the only way. Jesus showed a way of open to all, Jew and Gentile, slave and free, male and female, a way of compassion and justice and unity. But what happened? We started to worship the person, Jesus, instead of following the way of Jesus. We got caught up in creeds, what we believed about Jesus, instead of following the way of Jesus. We went from being followers of the way, and I love that. Christians, the early Christians, were not called Christians. They were initially called followers of the way. And I love that. I would like to resurrect that title. I would like to call us followers of the way. And then later the word Christian was put when we started getting into creeds and all, belief about Jesus. Was he God? Was he not? All that stuff. And then from there we moved to Christ as the only way to salvation in heaven. And in order to be saved, you must believe in him and him only, and he only is revealed in this church alone, and that's it. Remember that for those who are cradled, the one true church, those statements. This emphasis on creeds and beliefs and Jesus as the only way creates a situation, and has throughout the centuries, where we're willing to kill you if you don't believe, in the hopes that God will have mercy on your soul. How crazy is that? Where's the love? Where's the love? What's weird is most Christian churches still believe this, still believe that way. Most would crucify me for saying the things that I'm saying today. I hope none here want to do that, but there's a cross over there just in case. Does this mean that I don't believe in the primacy of Christ, and that I don't believe that Christ really reveals the face of God? I do believe it. I believe it to my bone marrow, but I believe that the way of Jesus reveals the way of God. Not belief about Jesus. Not belief about Jesus. I told this, I think I told this story before. One of my professors at Catholic University, his name was Father Mike Scanlon, and he taught a class called Christian Anthropology. And in that class, keep in mind this was in the 80s, prior to the internet and cell phones, and he said, guys, I predict that as we move into the future, we're going to become an increasingly global community. Already through television, we can know what's happening in any part of the world pretty much instantaneously. We're living in an age unlike any other age of humanity. We've never been able to learn. And we're slowly waking up and learning that Christianity ain't the only game on the block. And our way of doing things is not the only way of doing things. And different cultures do things different ways. And he said, my prediction is as we grow into the future, two things are going to happen. One, some people are going to be so fascinated by this openness and the unity of it all and the mystery of it all. I'm one of those. And I think those of us here are pretty much those. But then he said, I predict that there will be a reaction to that and an increased fundamentalism. Well, guess what? We're seeing it, aren't we? We're seeing increased fundamentalism across all religions: Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism. We're seeing an increased nationalism, politically throughout the world. Really, instead of global, being a global community and working together. We're seeing that reaction. This is why I believe that Jesus spoke so often of love, because he saw all this stuff coming. He knew how much easier it was for us to feel good about ourselves by following the rules and following the right way, or being part of the right religion, and being able to look at somebody else and saying, well, you're not. But I am. And he saw the problems with this, and he saw the fights and the literal wars that this causes. And he knew that love is more difficult. It seems so easy. I mean, By this they will know you're my disciples, by your love for one another. It's pretty simple. Sounds pretty simple. Some think that the way of Jesus is irrelevant today. But I think Jesus' message in his way is needed more than ever today in an age where groups of people are increasingly demonized, scapegoated by people, even in the highest levels of government, and by church officials. We are living in an increasingly us and them society. Today, such division is stoked more and more. I would say this: as followers of the way of Jesus, we are to have nothing to do with such rhetoric, nor are we to support it in any way. It baffles me and saddens me that so many so-called Christians line up behind leaders who tout this demonization and scapegoating of certain types of people, be they immigrants or the poor, those of other religions or races, orientations, etc. Churches today are filled with people who line up behind and support such rhetoric. And today in the gospel, we hear Jesus whispering, "This is how they will know that you are my disciples, by your love for one another." I pray that some of those Christians today hear that message. I pray that we hear that message. And frankly, I pray that I hear that message, because I need to hear it, because love is hard. And I'll admit to you, I don't like some people. I don't. As followers of the way, we're called upon to show the way of Jesus more than ever. And we may find ourselves criticized for it, even by Christians, when we speak of love and compassion in support of the needs of those who are demonized in our society today. I used to have a sign, my last assignment as a Franciscan, as most of you know, I was retreat director at Mount St. Francis, and I saw this bumper sticker and I bought it, and I taped it to my office door, and it said this: "Jesus, save me from some of your followers." Jesus knew that love needs to be the way, and he knew our human tendency to divide up into tribes of us and them and rules and regulations. And so, brothers and sisters, I would say to us, let us be people of the way. Let us be those who refuse to demonize individuals or groups of people. Let us be those who reflect the way of love and the way of Jesus. Now, one caveat. I remember having a moral theology teacher in high school. His name was Father John Hiltz, and he would always look at us in the minor seminary and he'd say, "Boys, Jesus told us to love one another. Over and over, Jesus told us to love one another. But that don't mean we're going to like everybody." And I love that. I love that distinction. I always thought that in order to love, you have to like. Well, I don't like some people. You probably don't like some people, right? Please say yes. I don't want to be the only one. I mean, we all have people in our life or groups of people that we don't like. I don't like the Christians who line up behind divisive rhetoric. I'll admit it. But I'm called to love them. We are called to love people, even those that we don't like. That is, we are called to treat them with respect instead of throwing fuel on the fires of division by judging them. You see, brothers and sisters, the way of Jesus is needed more than ever today. More than ever. It is totally relevant. We are simply to show the way by our love and by our non-participation in anything that would divide us. In that beautiful reading from Revelation that Marcia read, it ended by saying, "Behold, I make all things new. Behold, I make all things new." Sisters and brothers, may it be so in our lives. Let's be part of making all things new by our love for one another and all people. May it be so in our own hearts, in our community. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Period. Amen.